The content of the following podcast was put together before the recent events reported in the news about aviation disasters. Our best thoughts and condolences go to anybody affected in those circumstances.
Are you the quantum mechanics?
Yes, we are the Quantum Mechanics, the paranormal podcast for the believers, the doubters, and the new year.
Happy New Year. Is it New Year now? I can't,
It is
when
New
we're
Year
recording.
now.
Yes, well, it isn't New Year, obviously, when we're recording, but it will be. How was your Christmas?
It was all right, thank you. I don't know if you've noticed, this arm looks a bit odd. That's because that's all cheese. Everything in that arm is cheese. And towards the fingers is blue cheese.
Right. And is the other half pie and turkey?
The other half actually is pigs in blankets. So we spent so my partner and I are not vegetarian. We spent a good deal of Christmas with people who were vegetarian. That meant there was a lot of additional sausage meat and bacon for me to eat. And I did.
Good. Well, it's good. Well, we had a really good Christmas. We spent Christmas Day at my partner's brother's, so my brother-in-law's, and we had a bit of a UFO encounter, which I will go into more detail on the Extra Scoop. So if you want to hear what that was all about, if you go to patreon.com/TQM pod, it was a drone UAP UFO kind of weird encounter. So yeah, if you want to hear about that, come and join us on the Extra Group after this.
Good idea.
Excellent. Should we just get straight into it? Ben, we featured many stories of pilots encountering unidentified flying objects in the skies. Well, today we are taking to the skies once more. This time not in search of UFO or drones, but ghosts.
The ghosts of the skies, okay.
And I've specifically chosen commercial pilots and cabin crew who've encountered ghostly apparitions and paranormal activity at 30,000 feet. Well, other feats are available.
I was just going to say, that is a very specific search criteria.
Yeah, no, it was wider
If it's
than
29,000 feet, I don't want to know.
Now, as you know, Ben, for us passengers, flying can be very stressful, and extreme circumstances can lead to deep paranoia and even hallucinations. So I've looked into this, why that is the case. So, first up, fatigue and sleep deprivation. On long flights, especially those that span multiple time zones, it can result in severe fatigue leading to visual or auditory hallucinations. Also, you can get dehydration. Cabin air is often very dry, and dehydration can affect cognitive function.
Yeah, I suppose it can, yeah.
Then you've got stress and anxiety. The stress of flying, particularly in turbulent conditions or during emergencies, can trigger anxiety-induced hallucinations. Certain medications, alcohol or recreational drugs can alter perception and lead to hallucination, especially in combination with the other factors that I've talked about before. And in rare circumstances, you can get something called hypoxia. At high altitudes, reduced oxygen levels can lead to hypoxia, which may cause symptoms like confusion, dizziness and hallucinations. I think if there is something wrong with the cabin, I don't think you always get that at high things.
I mean, I do have terrible fear of flying. And after everything else failed, my doctor did give me temazepam, but I won't take it because I find it confuses me enough on the ground. I don't want to be in the air that way.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah. Well, all these factors mean when we look at paranormal encounters reported by passengers on planes, I don't know, we may need to take them with a little pinch of salt, given all the stresses and strains involved. Which is why I decided to focus on ghost encounters reported by pilots and cabin crew, rather than passengers.
Who are more used to the flight.
Yeah, I mean, look, they're not immune, but they are less likely to suffer from paranoia or hallucinations compared to us mere mortal passengers. So I thought it was a good place to start, really.
Yeah.
Well, let's kick off with some short stories before we get into some more famous cases. Now, these stories have all been reported by cabin crew or pilots. Now, the first two short stories involve what seems like glitches in technology, but there could be something more paranormal at play, even little gremlins, maybe. We'll start with the flight instructor who's training one of his new students in a small aircraft. The instructor and student were making their final approach to land at Orlando Executive Airport when a voice of a young girl came on their radio broadcast on an emergency frequency. The voice of the young girl kept saying, "Hello," repeatedly.
Oh, like an EVP kind
Like
of?
an EVP, yeah, but over the emergency broadcast.
Right, okay.
Now, the pilot found out a few months earlier a young woman had stolen an aircraft from a local flight school, and unfortunately this young woman had crashed the plane and been killed. And the pilot believed it was a ghostly voice he had heard on the emergency radio frequency. Like an echo or, like you said, like an EVP.
Right. Yeah, okay. So a real incident that had happened in the past?
Yeah.
Right.
That he picked up on now. Now, the next short story could be a paranormal entity tapping into technology on a plane or a glitch in the Matrix even. The pilot of this plane, while coming into land, so they input their approach coordinates into the plane's data screen. Done it many times before, standard practice. But this time for them it was different. After inputting the coordinates, a strange message appeared on the screen in the cockpit. It read, "Don't you wish you knew what this means?"
Oh, come on.
That would freak you out, wouldn't it?
I mean, worse if I was in the cabin rather than the pilot. Don't you wish you knew what this means? What, that appears on a computer screen?
As they've put in the approach coordinates for landing.
What happened then?
The pilot alerted the captain of the plane to the message. After reading it, the captain ordered the pilot to reload the coordinates and the system went back to normal. No one from the airline or the plane manufacturers could explain how this cryptic message, "Don't you wish you knew what this means?" had appeared and been seen by both the pilot and the captain.
I wonder, that sounds to me like maybe a piece of stray code, like a tester.
Yeah.
But then, like, stray code in a computer in an aircraft would be a very, very serious
Because I
incident,
thought
wouldn't
at first, could it be like some kind of Easter eggy type? But you wouldn't put that in that,
You're
would you?
putting an Easter egg in there. No, it's not like Fortnite, is it?
I like your idea that it could be some leftover code from a testing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense, doesn't it?
But even so, like, it would, like, I know coders, and, they wouldn't, you wouldn't leave that in, I don't think. I mean, I do know one where this is a good story. A friend of mine used to work as an IT, like, manager at a bank, but for the marketing
Right.
people, and this is like in the 90s, they were doing things that were quite advanced for the time, like using new databases to send physical mail to people, and they wanted to target their top 100 richest people, and their new computer system let them do it. And in the test, the tester had used the faux address and name Rich B.
Right.
And so 100 of their best customers got yes.
Oh.
It arrived through the mail, "Dear Rich B," and to say that they got their arses handed to them on a plate is to put it very lightly.
What a disaster.
I know.
What a disaster.
But you would, that's a bank. That is nowhere near as important as an aeroplane.
An aeroplane.
Yeah. Wow, that's incredible.
It's reminded me a bit like, I know it's a technological version, but it reminded me of What's the Frequency, Kenneth. There was,
Yeah.
Don't you want to know what this means?
Yeah.
You'd be freaked out. Well, one of the most frustrating situations for any traveller is lost luggage. Have you ever lost luggage on a journey?
I haven't. My partner has, and it's awful because you then have to go and try and find the right pairs of pants and all sorts. Yeah.
Well, in this next story, it was more than a few holiday clothes that went missing. So, very sad. A newly married couple decided to take their dream honeymoon in Europe. That part is not the sad bit. That's the good bit. However, tragically, the husband suffered a heart attack and died a few days into the honeymoon. So the grief-stricken wife managed to arrange to repatriate her husband's body back to the US. She boarded a flight to Florida, and her husband's coffin was stored in the hold. Or so she thought.
Oh, no.
After landing in Florida, the woman was told by ground staff that they couldn't find her husband's coffin and that they believed it may have never even made it onto the flight.
Oh, what?
So, yeah, she lost her husband.
Well, they found him again, though, surely.
Well, after 5 days, the airline contacted her to say that the coffin had been found at the couple's local airport. But there was a twist. When the coffin was opened, there was no body inside.
No.
Case remains a mystery.
No way.
Yeah.
So the man went completely missing?
Completely missing. Wasn't in the coffin. So I can see how the coffin may have ended up at their local airport because they may have just labelled it from her home address or something and it confused baggage staff. But where the body went to, no idea.
That is really disturbing.
Yeah.
That is really disturbing. Gosh, what year was that? Is that recent?
It's probably 10 years ago, I think.
Wow. Okay.
Well, let's move on to a story from the UK with a similar theme. Now, at 30,000 feet, cabin crew for a well-known British Airlines were approached by an elderly man who had wandered into the galley area.
I can see it now.
The man asked the crew if they could pass a message onto a woman sitting near the back of the plane. He said, "Can you tell her I'm okay?" So when the crew, they said, of course, you would, wouldn't you? When the crew went to speak to the woman, she seemed very confused. Eventually, she pulled out a photo from her bag and said, "Is this the man?" The cabin crew confirmed it was. The woman went a little ashen-faced and told the crew it was her husband, who had recently died and, in fact, was being carried in a coffin in the hold.
Oh.
What a lovely story, though, in a way.
It is, but why didn't he go the other way and just go and see
her? Maybe it thought it would freak her out.
See, I thought like an old man coming into the galley area, like, "Have you got any more gravy? Any more gravy?"
Yeah.
That's the sort of thing. Well, no, that is nice, but also that tells you something about the nature of like reality, because he obviously realised that he was on an aircraft.
Yeah, to go to the cabin crew. Although I mean, it depends on the cabin crew. They may have just said, "Well, can't you go and tell her yourself?" But I guess no.
Well, maybe they were just like, "Oh, he's
old. He
confused,
can't travel all the way
yeah,
down there."
Yeah. Oh, that's a good one, that is.
Well, we have another story about a dead body on a plane, this time a cargo plane rather than a passenger one. Now, this account is directly from the pilot. They say, "I flew a dead body in a body bag by myself at night in a Chieftain PA-31 350, for those of you plane buffs out there, quite a small plane. So he's on his own. Said after 10 minutes into the flight, the dead guy started to groan and jerk pretty hard."
That's surely got to be pressure, right?
Yeah, he said, "I had it strapped down, so I don't know how much it would have moved if I'd not restrained it. I kind of muttered under my breath and looked over my shoulder for the rest of the 25-minute flight."
Oh, no.
He agrees with you. He says, "I'm pretty sure it was just gases inside the corpse, brought out by the pressure change from ground to 3,000 feet up, but it sure was freaky."
At least it didn't ring the assistance bell.
Can you imagine just being on your own?
No, I really can't.
Oh.
I really can't. I don't like that thought at all.
More ghost sightings by pilot, this time on CCTV. So during a flight in cruise, the captain noticed on the Boeing 737 CCTV that 2 small children, a boy and a girl, were playing next to the cockpit door. He couldn't understand why they were there and why the cabin crew had not stopped them or moved them on. He called the senior steward, asking why the children were playing next to the cockpit door. She believed he was pranking her, so she just ignored him. After a few times of asking what was going on with the children...
prank.
Yeah, the captain let it go. He didn't mention it again. Until they reached the hotel that evening, when the pilot asked if the senior steward really had not seen them, as both the pilots had witnessed them playing children. She said there were no children in the galley near the cockpit door at any time.
Is there any record of a pair of children dying on the flight?
No, there was no kind of backstory to this. So I got a lot of these from a flight website where pilots and cabin crew share their stories. So they're all pretty short and brief and not much detail or backup, but interesting.
I wonder whether that is similar to the last story and the children. They must be attached to somebody on the aircraft rather than the aircraft, I would think.
Yeah, it's reminding me of those. We did the ones of the Ghost of the London Underground. There was a couple there where people had seen things on CCTV as well. Interesting.
You see, I would also be scared of reporting that, or at least concerned about reporting that, because there is, and I know this from sort of family experience, there is a kind of dementia that makes you hallucinate small children.
Right.
And I bet if he reported that
without he wouldn't be flying. Well, both pilots saw it.
Right, okay, well, that's better, yeah.
Interesting, though. It's, again, it's very kind of EVP like that, isn't it? Those CCTV glitches.
Yeah.
I mean, some might say, it's, I don't know what, it could be something to do with the recording equipment but again, it must be a live feed rather than a recording, so I don't know. Do you know what I mean? Like leftover images or whatever, but yeah.
Yes.
Well, you thought that was strange. The next story is very bizarre. Earlier, we talked about an airline losing a dead body. Well, in this story, a live one goes missing during the flight above the Atlantic Ocean. Now, you're probably aware, Ben, that on long-haul flights, you often have more than one set of pilots, I guess, to take over, or I think they do it to turn the plane around, don't they, as well, quickly when they reach their other destination. They kind of finish theirs. Whatever reason, this plane had 2 pilots flying and 2 backup pilots.
Right.
So the flight took off from the US, heading for Europe, 4 pilots on board. Well into the flight, one of the pilots told their colleagues he was leaving the cockpit to walk around the cabin. I guess he wanted to stretch his legs. Been stuck there all day. But he never came back. The remaining pilots asked the crew to have a subtle look for him without disturbing the passenger. Can you imagine? You go, we've just lost one of our pilots. If you could just excuse me.
6'4", I'll just say the name of Captain Jeffries.
Yeah.
You're wearing a cap.
They couldn't find him on the plane.
What?
He had disappeared from the flight thousands of feet above the Atlantic Ocean. After the plane landed and the passengers had disembarked, a thorough search of the plane was conducted, but there was no sign of the missing pilot. Have you got any theories on this? Because there is a theory that the authorities have put forward.
Well, the trouble is there's a passenger manifest, so they would know in and out. I was going to say he sort of wore a disguise and went out as a passenger, but that doesn't make much sense. I don't know.
Well, you could be on something there. Authorities had a theory about what actually happened. So the missing pilot was suffering from depression and was having financial difficulties. He was way behind on his alimony payments. They believed he left the cockpit, changed into civilian clothes, took a seat in the cabin pretending to be a passenger, and when the plane landed, he disembarked with the other passengers, seemingly to start a new life in Europe. But, however, there is no record of him going through customs or immigration.
Yeah, that's what I'd be thinking.
His bags were still on board. And again, the case remains a mystery. He's never chipped up again. Whoa,
that is such a mystery. I'm surprised we haven't heard about that before, because, I mean, when you land, you have to give your passport to go through passport control again.
Yeah.
Unless he'd paid for a fake one.
Well, I guess he could have used his normal passport, but then you'd have some record, wouldn't you, you'd think?
And also...
Or unless they waved him through, he's a pilot, we'll wave him through.
Wouldn't you also just say, like, all of the people sitting down, did anybody come and sit with you in the middle of the flight who wasn't there at the beginning of the flight?
Yeah. And I guess they'd all got off, but yeah, you would go and check, wouldn't you? Yeah.
That is creepy.
Yeah. Because you kind of go, well, if it was something paranormal, it'd have to be like a time slip or something, but why only one person? He obviously couldn't get out of the plane.
No. Wow, that's really flummoxed me. What was his name?
Don't know his name.
Wow, that's good.
Well, from the story of a living pilot who disappeared from a plane to one of a dead pilot who refused to leave his 737. This particular old Boeing 737 was in service for a low-cost airline in the UK. A number of crew reported strange activity when they flew on the plane. This included call bells going off in the middle of the night that had not been pressed by passengers. Galley cupboards would fly open unexpectedly, and the toilets would flush randomly when no one was in there. Crew also reported seeing strange shadowy figures and ghostly apparitions in the galley area and the flight deck. They also reported sudden drops in temperature. Sounds a bit like a poltergeist, right?
It does.
Well, the plane had a tragic history. It had previously been hijacked and the pilot had been shot and killed on board. Crews believed that the ghost of the dead pilot still haunted his plane. Eventually, the 737 was retired from service and scrapped. Now, these are the danger of these stories online, because I must say a few red flags went up for me on this, because I thought, actually, a UK airline, plane was hijacked and the pilot was killed on board. That's got to be easy to Google and find the original incident. I couldn't find anything to back up that story, which just makes me think creepypasta or, something made up.
Yeah, because it was quite rare for the pilot to be killed, because they normally want the plane to be able to be flown again. And a lot of those hijackings before the 9/11 era, they're sort of like Iranian terrorists.
They're quite rare as well, so
they're rare.
Finding it, UK airline, pilot, hijacked plane, pilot killed, that would,
Totally,
You'd only have to put those keywords in. So I did lots of keyword searches, I did some AI searches, nothing.
Right, okay.
Well, let's move on to one of the most talked about airplane hauntings in history, that of Flight 401, which we have talked about this case before, but I thought given we're looking at this, we might as well go back to it again, because it is just an incredible story. But I'll do a slight shorter summary of it this time. So Eastern Airlines Flight 401 was a scheduled flight from New York City to Miami, Florida. Tragically crashed on December the 29th, 1972. The aircraft, a Lockheed L-1011 TriStar, 1011 or... Yeah, must be.
Yeah.
Not or 1011, 1011 sounds better, was piloted by Captain Bob Loft, with First Officer Don Repo and Flight Engineer George N. Bud Mahoney was also on board. The flight was relatively routine until it approached Miami International Airport. As the flight approached its destination, the crew noticed that the landing gear indicator did not illuminate, signalling that the landing gear was not properly deployed. In an attempt to troubleshoot the issue, Captain Loft became preoccupied with the landing gear problem, inadvertently allowing the plane to descend below its safe altitude. The aircraft ultimately crashed into the Everglades, resulting in the death of 101 of the 176 people on board, making it one of the deadliest accidents in US aviation history. Now, I believe when we covered this story before, I think there was actually nothing wrong with the landing gear. It was just a sensor that had gone wrong, and he was so busy trying to sort that out that that's what caused the tragedy. Well, in the wake of the tragedy, the surviving crew members and families of the victims were left to grapple with their loss. However, what followed the crash was even more astonishing. Reports began to emerge from other Eastern Airline flights and personnel about ghostly encounters involving the deceased crew members. One of the most prominent figures in the ghost story is Officer Don Repo. Multiple flight crews reported seeing Repo's apparition in the cockpit, often inquiring about the status of the flight. Pilots claim they felt his presence, especially during critical moments, as if he was trying to guide them. Similarly, Captain Loft's spirit was said to have appeared to various flight attendants. They reported feeling a strange sense of calm or receiving warnings during turbulence, as if Loft was watching over them. Some crew members even claimed to have heard his voice offering advice about flying and how to look after the passengers.
Ooh.
So numerous accounts from flight crews and passengers detailed experience of unexplained phenomena on the planes, such as cold spots, flickering lights, and the feeling of being watched. Some reported that the aircraft itself seemed to carry an unusual weight or heaviness, contributing to the eerie atmosphere. Now, the airline industry took those reports seriously, leading to an investigation into the ghostly claims. Eastern Airlines sought to reassure its staff and customers, but the stories only gained momentum. So this one, a bit like, we remember when we covered James Dean's car, and bits of that car were used in other cars that went on to have difficulties. Well, some reports suggest that various components, including cockpit instruments and seats, were installed from the Flight 401 in different aircraft. Crew members who subsequently flew these planes began experiencing strange occurrences, often attributing them to the presence of the spirit of Captain Loft and First Officer Repo. So I think the ones I said earlier were just stuff that happened on the same airlines flights, but then there was stuff that happened with instruments that were used from the original plane.
Right. I remember learning from that as well that it was, or is, common practice to change engines between aircraft.
Yeah.
So it's not unusual to get the parts of another aircraft on your, mixing them up.
Well, as those stories spread, certain aircraft that contained parts from Flight 401 gained a reputation as haunted. Crew members were often hesitant to fly these planes, fearing they might encounter the spirits of the deceased crew members. So it took traction, that story. But, it's incredible how... It's weird, though, it kind of only affected that airline, which, again, makes you do think about some kind of almost cultural hysteria that went amongst those crew rather than the reality of it. Because, I would have thought, even big airlines, you must come across crew members all the time. So I would have thought the majority of crew members would have known at least one of those people on that flight or worked with them. Yeah,
it strikes me as a little bit like when we look at mass hysteria and, for example, children in a school, they pass down the story of like the dead caretaker or whatever.
Yeah.
That sort of thing, it feels like it, a story that two pilots tell each other at 2 a.m. when they've got a boring flight on. Yeah. It is a romantic thought, though.
Yeah. Well, another major case is that of Helios Flight 522. Now, Helios Airways Flight 522 was a scheduled passenger flight from Larnaca in Cyprus to Athens in Greece, tragically crashed on August the 14th, 2005. The Boeing 737-300 carried 121 people and encountered a series of fatal mechanical failures that would lead to one of the most harrowing aviation disasters in recent history. On the night of the flight, the aircraft took off with a malfunctioning pressurization system. The crew, unaware of the situation, failed to recognise that the cabin was losing air pressure. And because the oxygen mask did not deploy automatically, many passengers succumbed to hypoxia, which we mentioned earlier in the show. Lack of oxygen that leads to unconsciousness. After flying for several hours in a state of autopilot, the plane became unresponsive to the crew's attempt to regain control. Eventually, the aircraft ran out of fuel, crashed into a mountain near Grammatiko, Greece, and it killed all on board. The tragedy raised significant questions about crew training and aircraft maintenance. So in the wake of the crash, investigations revealed several communication and procedural failures. However, what followed in the years to come was even more unsettling. Stories began to circulate about ghostly encounters associated with the flight, particularly in relation to aircraft and its passengers. Reports emerged from airport staff and pilots who claimed to have seen apparitions or felt strange presence in the vicinity of the aircraft wreckage. Some encountered feelings of dread when approaching areas connected with the crash. Similar to other aviation tragedy, parts of the crashed Boeing 737 were salvaged and reused. Crew members flying aircraft with components from Flight 522 reported unsettling experiences such as hearing whispers or experiencing cold spots within the cockpit. Some passengers who travelled on later flights using the same aircraft model claimed to feel a sense of unease, particularly when they learned about the flight's tragic history. Well, I guess you would, wouldn't you? Stories of passengers feeling as if they were being watched or guided by an unseen force became common. The site of the crash has become a place of remembrance where family members and friends of the victims hold vigils. Some attendees have reported feeling the presence of lost loved ones, further intertwining the narrative of the crash with the paranormal. I mean, there's a lot there, but I think a lot of that could probably be explained through grief, I think, and processing grief.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. It's a hard one, that one, because there's so many people involved.
Yeah, so many. Well, the next story has elements of the movie Final Destination to it. So on August the 2nd, 2005, Air France Flight 358, an Airbus A340, was arriving at Toronto Pearson International Airport from Paris. During the landing, the aircraft overran the runway, crashed through a fence and caught fire. Now, remarkably, all 309 passengers and crew members on board survived, although some did sustain injuries, but they all survived. It's incredible, that, isn't it? Caught fire.
Yeah.
Now, the accident raised significant concerns about runway safety and emergency protocols. But in the aftermath of the crash, several survivors and airport staff reported experiencing unusual phenomena. These included some survivors describing having vivid dreams or visions relating to the crash, often feeling as if they were reliving the traumatic events. Again, arguably, that could be them reliving the traumatic events, PTSD type stuff, rather than paranormal. These experiences sometimes included seeing fellow passengers or crew members, which left them with a sense of unease. Crew members and airport personnel working near the crash site reported feelings of being watched or accompanied by an unseen presence. They often described a strange energy in the area, which they attributed to the traumatic events that had unfolded. There were anecdotal reports from local residents and airport staff of seeing ghostly figures or lights near the site of the crash. Some claim to have witnessed apparitions resembling passengers or flight crew members. Now remember, everyone survived. Survivors and families of the passengers began holding memorials and vigils at the airport. During these gatherings, attendees expressed feeling the presence of their loved ones, further solidifying the connection between the crash and the paranormal. Weird that, isn't it? They survived, but people were seeing their ghosts.
Why were they holding vigils, though?
I don't know. It doesn't make sense, does it? I guess some people were badly injured. I don't know.
Maybe it's a way through it to sort of
deal with the trauma.
Yeah. But that is particularly peculiar. It's almost as if another dimension is leaking through and affecting people's thoughts, a dimension where everybody did die.
Or it makes you think, did something intervene to save the passengers? I don't know. But then why wouldn't it do it more often? It doesn't make sense, does it?
No, that is a weird one. Interesting, though, in that, it's one of my fascinations is like the true nature of what ghosts are and what we see.
Yeah.
If people are experiencing, we've covered this before. We've covered ghosts of the people who aren't dead.
Yeah.
Maybe this is like real life crisis apparitions, but seen after the event.
Yeah.
Maybe they are crisis apparitions.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Well, leading on from that, we've probably all heard stories of people missing planes that went on to crash, right?
Oh, yeah.
Now, most of these tales are creepypasta or urban legend or urban myths, but there are some amazing examples of true stories like this, including that of Antonis Mavropoulos. Now, this I've taken from the Guardian newspaper from 2019, the title, Saved by Luck, the passenger who just missed flight ET-302.
Oh, ET-302.
Yeah. So Antonis Mavropoulos knows he is lucky, the article says. Alone among passengers booked on Ethiopian airline flights ET-302, he got to the departure gate 2 minutes after it had closed. He said, "I could see a guy in a green T-shirt and others balding, and I shouted to also be let in," he says, his voice cracking with emotion. "I am still in a state of shock knowing what happened. I found it very difficult to sleep since." 5 days after the Nairobi-bound Boeing 737 MAX 8 jet crashed within a few minutes of takeoff from Addis Ababa, the Greek chemical engineer says he feels he has a moral obligation to uncover why the plane went down, killing all 157 people on board. "As the guy who was saved just by luck, I want to say something very clear," he says. "The souls of those people, the people I saw, all of those who died, could never be relieved unless there are concrete answers and the truth is uncovered." The latest news alluding to design faults had especially unsettled him. "I have been reading a lot of reports about potential problem to designs, that the pilot asked soon after takeoff to go back, and to be honest, it has freaked me out. I fly between 100 and 120 times a year. I very much hope this is not a case of criminal ignorance or a design issue being intentionally hidden," he tells The Guardian during a phone interview from Beirut, where he works much of the time as the head of Athens-based waste management company. The 53-year-old, who also presides over the International Solid Waste Association, an NGO headquartered in Vienna, was on his way to Nairobi via Addis Ababa last weekend to attend a UN Environmental Assembly. Travelling from Beirut overnight, he was aware that his stopover was so short that he would have to make a run for it as soon as he landed to get the connecting plane. "I'm not the sort of person who travels business, but in this case I did because the next flight left 30 minutes later and I thought I would have some leverage if I was able to make it. I was the first to get off the plane and was told a connection ambassador would be on the ground to escort me, but in the event he was delayed by a couple of minutes. That and the fact that I was carrying my own luggage were the two things that saved me. If I'd checked it in, the gate would have closed and the flight would have waited." When he was told he would have to take the next flight 3 hours later, Mavropoulos was initially irritated. Waiting in the lounge without access to the internet or TV, he did not find out what had happened to the flight until much later. "I don't know if it applied to the whole airport, but no one could get online, and it was as I was going to board the second flight at around 10:50 a.m. that one of the women said, 'Our manager wants to speak to you. It's a matter of protocol, as you are the only passenger who did not board the earlier plane that went missing.' It was only then, and when he subsequently received a text from a friend in Athens relaying the news of the crash in Diesel, that reality began to dawn. I realised how close it was and how randomly I was saved, and at the time I was like imploding inside because it was just way too much," he says. "Even if I was saved, it was also a huge burden on my mind knowing what had happened to everyone else. I felt the ground slipping away under my feet. I knew instantly that I had to call my family, my mother, my wife and daughter, the people I love, to relieve them of my burden of worrying." Eventually he flew to Nairobi later that day and attended the UN Environmental Assembly, kept himself busy meeting people, listening to lectures and giving talks. Since then, he's also spent a great deal of time contemplating the role of chance in a person's life. "I know we Greeks are given to philosophizing, but I've spent a lot of time in recent days thinking how important randomness is in our daily life and how we should respect it more than we do. Often we speak about bad luck, but we don't so often acknowledge good luck and the integral part it plays in our lives. It might be the case that the only reason I was saved is to help uncover why everyone else on that plane died."
So that's what he's done. He's made it his mission.
So, yeah, get to the truth, yeah.
That must feel very weird to be...
I know a lot of people in that situation have a kind of survivor's guilt, don't they? Yeah.
But he's in like there was a moment there, he was like in a quantum mechanical super state.
Yeah.
Which is very peculiar to think about. And he must keep going through his mind. If that guy had been on time, if my luggage had been picked up, I'd be dead.
Yeah.
That
by
is,
2 minutes. He could
Yeah.
see them boarding the plane.
Yeah. But this is a flight version of the. If I had pulled out in front of that truck, I'd be dead.
Yeah. Amazing,
Yeah.
isn't it?
This is, yeah. I find that really quite spooky when I think about it from his point of view. And he must have, well, it sounds like he's got this idea that, see, this is the trouble with the human brain. It probably is just complete chance and it means nothing. But we have to build it into something because that's the way the brain works.
Yeah.
And that's how superstition comes about. I bet he's not on time for anything now. I don't think I would be.
And that kind of sense of uncovering the truth, it's like, because I survived, I have to have that purpose. But I think that's almost a coping mechanism in itself, maybe.
It must be, because you must feel your own mortality sort of flying through your bones there.
And in that story, it's not like, oh, he was one of 5 who didn't make the flight. He was the only one, and everybody else perished.
Yeah, he's got no one to talk to.
Yeah, it's incredible. Well, if this episode, Ben, has left you fearful, or even more fearful of flying, let's look at some facts. Firstly, flying is considered one of, if not the safest forms of travel. The chances of dying in a plane crash are 1 in 11 million. This compares to 1 in 103 chance of dying in a car accident.
Is it as high as that?
I guess it's. I was looking at that fact. I think it's if there's been a crash.
Yeah. Thing is, with a car crash, I suppose 90% of the time it's just a little bump.
Yeah. Well, you're more likely to be struck by lightning than be involved in a plane crash. In fact, you're 13 times more likely to die in the bath. And in terms of having a paranormal encounter on a plane, I would say the odds of that are pretty low.
Yes, I think they're pretty low.
If my research is anything to go by, compared to other ghostly topics we covered, it was really hard to find these stories and check them out. So, yeah.
See, I've seen quite a lot of, like, YouTube top 10 videos where there's been, like, a steward walking through the fuselage and then, like, it appears there's someone sitting in a seat. But I don't buy those as much. They often look fake to me. And I always think, well, why were you videoing in the first place?
Yeah, I agree. There is a lot of creepypasta out there. And actually, some of the ones I've told, maybe. I'm not 100% sure, like I said.
Yeah.
But I did have a thing, which I'm not going to go into. I did find a good academic paper about treatments for aviophobia, the fear of flying.
Not fear of big cages where birds are kept.
No.
People do have that as well.
I've got quite a lot on this, but I'm not going to do it because it is quite a lot of stuff. But basically, there is a new technique which involves virtual reality.
Yeah.
Which VR headsets getting onto play. It's like, becoming familiar with the environment does help. Apparently, it's from the study I saw, I think it had 100% success rate within a 2-year period, but they don't know the long-term effects yet. So more research needed. But yeah, VR treatment could be the way forward if you have a phobia of flying.
So I've done loads of those. Well, I've done 3 of those fear of flying courses.
Have you done any VR stuff?
No, because the fear of flying courses, the trouble with them was my former employer used to pay for them. And I did 2 where you didn't get on a plane and 1 where you did. And the one where you did, I'm so phobic about planes. I literally turned up to registration because it had been paid for, had the coffee and then ran away because I was like, I can't sit here the whole time thinking I'm going to be on a plane in 2 hours. I couldn't do it. Right. So I think there's a flaw in them.
You know it's VR. You would know it's VR rather than reality, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. I think I would. But mine is born mainly out of, I don't know. I just find them terrifyingly large beasts. But
there's a lot. You're cramped. There's a lack of control. I get it.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to leave you with a couple of funny announcements made by pilots to their passengers during their flights. Nothing paranormal, but I found them and I thought they were amusing. The first from a pilot on a long-haul flight who made this announcement. In case of an emergency landing, air masks will drop from the overhead compartments. Place your mask over your nose and mouth and adjust the straps on either side to secure it. If you're travelling with a small child, secure your mask first, then assist them with theirs. If you're travelling with more than one child, decide which one has the most potential and assist that one first. And this one from a pilot after landing at a Florida airport. Welcome to Orlando. The safest part of your journey is now over.
What? Why would you say that?
And my last one from a captain who maybe didn't put their nervous passengers at ease. He said, my colleague on the right-hand side, his name is Steve Moore. He's had a long and distinguished career with the Royal Air Force spanning some decades or more. But luckily for us, he got rather bored of being a chef and has now decided to take up flying.
Oh, my word.
That wouldn't put you at ease, would it?
Well, don't forget, if it is true or apocryphal, we also know that it was an airport announcement that Mr. Dobalina.
Yes,
remember us talking
Mr.
about
Bob Dobalina.
Paging Mr. Dobalina, Mr. Bob Dobalina, heard by the monkeys.
It's the monkeys, yes, I remember you telling me
Who
that.
then turned it into a nonsense song, and then Del the Funky...
And was it a sample from Del, or did he redo it? I think I asked you this before,
I
and he
think
redid it.
I think he redid it, yes.
Brilliant.
Yes. But yes, that if that story is true, and it seems that the internet is 50-50 divided on this, we'd have to ask somebody from the monkeys. But yes, that would be good. But like, the other thing about this is ghosts on transport are a really strange thing. Like trains, we've covered a lot.
We should have a chat with Cam about, has he had any on his he's a coach driver.
On his coach driver, because I have seen some YouTube videos with haunted like seats.
Oh yeah,
in trains. Yes. Well, lobby Cam to do it if he hasn't already. Paranormalpresence.co.uk. Go on there and lobby Cam to not only take you on a ghost adventure, but also maybe take you on a haunted
coach.
Or haunted
could
coach,
be a new thing for him.
There must be some vehicles that could never be haunted. Never come across a haunted bicycle.
No, or well, it'd have to be a tandem really to make it work.
Or, I suppose it could just be the ghostly ringing. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there are people who have heard the ghostly ringing of a bicycle bell.
That sounds quite spooky.
Yeah.
Well, I hope you've enjoyed our trip to the skies, and yes. We're going to do the extra scoop now, where I'll go into my UFO tale, and we'll see you next week.
If you're a member of patreon.com/TQMpod, you can hear that extra scoop and loads more stuff, including episodes a week early and without ads.
Perfect. We'll see you there.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Are you the quantum mechanics?